The Housing Minister with us this morning, Matthew Pennycook. Always great to see you. Thanks for joining us. What are you going to do to get Britain building?
Well, as part of our Plan for Change mission to kickstart economic growth, we've been clear we're streamlining the delivery of nationally significant infrastructure projects. We made a number of changes to national planning policy last year to support that objective. We're taking further measures in the Planning and Infrastructure Bill later this year. And as part of that package, we're announcing today that we're reducing the number of judicial review permission attempts that are permitted from 3 to 2, but in cases without merit from 3 to 1, because we can't have spurious claims holding up these projects. And there are many, many examples I can give you, Kate, of where spurious claims have held up projects that are critical for our national infrastructure for many years. And that has a real-world impact on working people across the country in higher bills, longer commutes, pressures on water supply and the overall cost of development. So we're taking action. OK, what about cynical cases? Just one attempt at a legal challenge for cynical cases. What constitutes a cynical case? Well, the judge in each case can make that determination. But we know that there are spurious cynical cases that have been brought forward. I could give you many examples. There was an A47 National Highways project, for example, where a former Green Party councillor brought a claim which the judge said, and I quote, had no logical basis, held up that project for 2 years. East Anglia Wind Farms, a group dragged through the courts for another 2 years, a case thrown out at every turn. So we think it's right, yes, obviously, that the public have the opportunity to challenge the lawfulness of government decisions. That's absolutely right. But reducing it basically... But reducing it to one challenge. Yeah. Yes, where, you know, in those cases where the court itself... Well, I'm not sure it will be most cases, but in cases where the court judges that it doesn't have a solid basis, 1 attempt, 2 in other cases, down from 3. We think that's fair. It will get the system moving. It will allow us to deliver that critical national infrastructure that's in the national interest, that will bring down people's bills, help with commutes, take pressure off water supply. OK, what about environmental situation? What does that mean? Does it mean that you will be ripping up environmental rules? We're not ripping up environmental rules, no. And as I said, if environmental groups want to bring... one challenge, well, 1 challenge if it doesn't have a solid basis in the eyes of the judge in question. 2 if it does. But we're removing the initial paper application, if you like. As I've said, wildlife surveys, what happens with those? Wildlife surveys can continue to take place as they can. Yeah, we're not fundamentally in reducing the number of judicial review permission attempts saying that your environmental obligations, part of the planning system, don't need to be met. OK. Do you agree with the Chancellor that growth trumps other things? Does growth, I don't know, trump net zero, for example? I don't think it's about playing one of these off against the other. The Chancellor is absolutely right. We've been very clear about this from the moment we came into office. Growth is the #1 priority of this government and will remain so. But we're accelerating the drive to net zero, for example, through our Plan for Change, a clean power mission. So they don't need to be set off against each other, but growth is a priority when it comes to... So you support the extension of Heathrow Airport? I'm not going to comment on... Why? Because it's speculation, it's hypothetical. There's no application that's been submitted by Heathrow. If there was, would you support it, given that growth trumps everything? Well, I'm not going to speculate on an application... I'm just asking you what you would do. ...that hasn't been supported. I think what I could say in general terms, and I want to be slightly careful here, Kay, because there are quasi-judicial aspects to the DCO process, which my department has stewardship over this NSIP regime. I think what I'd say in general terms is any aviation project would have to demonstrate that it not only contributes to economic growth, but that it's compatible with our legally binding climate change commitments and that it meets high environmental standards around air quality and noise pollution. Goodness, you've nailed your colours to the mast there, haven't you? Let's wait and see what happens. Is it frustrating that the Mayor of London is opposed to airport expansion around the capital? Well, I wouldn't say it's frustrating. The Mayor of London can take his own view on any particular proposal that comes forward. Well, look, I think this is often sort of set up as the straw man. We're not saying that people around the country can't object to planning applications, can't object to nationally significant infrastructure projects. What we're doing is streamlining the process so that when a challenge is brought, and in this case, the changes were announced today, a judicial review permission request, yes, that challenge can be heard, but it can't be heard repeatedly over multiple times in a way that adds years and years and huge cost to project, because we won't be able to deliver the critical national infrastructure our country needs if that is the case. And as I said, that has a real-world impact for people across the country in higher bills, in longer commutes, in pressure on water supplies. I don't think any of your viewers would want to see that happen. Everyone recognises, it's a moan I hear on the doorstep many, many times, that we can't get anything built in this country and we can't do it quickly enough. And that's right in many of these cases.
And
we're taking steps to ensure
1.5 million houses. You
we are,
certainly
and we're going to determine 150 nationally significant infrastructure projects.
Let's see. What sort of punishment should be considered for sellers who don't check ID properly when it comes to selling knives?
Well, knife crime is a blight across the country. There's a horrific story in the paper this morning you've seen. I had an awful murder in Woolwich, in my constituency, 14-year-old child, Caelan Bakassa, just 2 weeks ago. I think this is an epidemic across the country. It's a moral mission for the government to halve knife crime. We're taking steps to do so, banning zombie knives, for example, doubling down on that commitment. And the Prime Minister has announced this week that we're taking steps to crack down on the online sale of knives, because in the case of Southport and others, young people have been able to buy knives online with relative ease, and we've got to take steps to address that.
Yeah, to that end, what should be considered as a punishment for sellers who don't check ID properly to make sure that the knives that are being sold either online or in store are being sold to the right people?
Well, the precise sort of enforcement mechanisms and punishments. I'm not going to get ahead of my.
Speculate.
I'm not going to get ahead of my colleagues who are introducing legislation to clamp down on this area. But we're very clear that we're going to clamp down and regulate online knife sales. And when we bring those measures in legislation this year, it will be very clear for the public to see what the penalties are for retailers that don't abide by those rules.
What would you like to see?
I'm not going to get ahead of what my colleagues... I'm sorry, but there's legislation...
Minister, you're here representing the government this morning.
And there's legislation that's going to be brought forward to address this very point.
I mean, pubs ultimately can be closed down if they sell booze to kids under 18.
But you would recognise, Kay, we've got to announce legislation in the House of Commons. I can't preempt what precisely is in that legislation on your programme this morning, I'm sorry.
OK. Is our military strong enough to take on the threat posed by Russia?
Yes, but we need to take steps to make it stronger. In terms of the incident that happened recently, we've been very clear this was a spy vessel. It was monitoring critical undersea infrastructure of the UK. We've declassified the information around that operation, including the surfacing of a Royal Navy submarine as a deterrent measure, precisely so that we can let Putin know that we know what he's doing, and there will be robust action that follows any threat to this country's security.
Do you want him to interpret that as a show of strength? Because, of course, there have been suggestions that our military is not fit for purpose at the moment and we need to invest more money in it. Certainly, this sort of story on the front page of the paper tells our foes that we're not to be messed with.
Well, and I think that's absolutely right. And the Defence Secretary in Parliament yesterday was very, very clear that we will take robust action to defend this nation's security, including our maritime borders.
And just a final thought on Southport before we let you go. Axel Ridukabana is going to be sentenced today. He can't get a whole life tariff because he was under 18 when he carried out these crimes. Do you have a thought?
Well, those are the sentencing guidelines. He can't get a whole life tariff, you're absolutely right. There are other charges that he's facing. I'm not going to get ahead again of the sentencing decision. I'm sure you have a view
on the case.
Of the sentencing decision that's going to... Well, it's...
Do you want to say a word for the families?
Horrific case, yes. And I think I would like to say, most importantly, aside of all the details around the sentencing guidelines and all that we could go into, it's going to be a very difficult day, not only for the families of the young girls who were so horrifically murdered, but the other families affected. And it will be a difficult day for them, not least because many of them are giving testimony, I understand, as part of that sentencing process. But let's see what comes out of the decision.
OK, it's good to see you. Thank you
very much.